It's cool to be cruel. You can treat your employees as something less than human because you're powerful. The rules don't apply to you. We're seeing a new fear based wave of leadership sweep across society, all shifting their styles and saying, now it's my way or the highway.
What would you say is the reason why fear driven leaders are showing up more maybe than the past?
What I have noticed is that
Do you want to know how to stay strong and keep your team safe when fears drives the culture? Well, this episode for you. My guest is Kate Lowry, CEO coach and author of Unbreakable: How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders. She shares proven tactics to spot a fear-based leader early, stay calm under pressure, and protect your career and well-being. She also reveals how to negotiate with difficult executives, build real resilience, and turn toxic workplaces into places where you can still perform and thrive.
10 years ago, the leadership style that was in vogue made CEOs have to at least pretend to care about their employees. And now it's totally different. We see this in TV shows like House of Cards, Billions, Game of Thrones. They all have fear based leaders.
Is there hope to deal with these people?
There are two different situations, maybe would have different outcomes. For someone who is genuinely a fear based leader, they don't have.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leader Show. I'm very happy today to have with us Kate Lowry. Kate is a CEO coach, so we share the same passion and probably the same work. Venture capitalist, also an author based in Silicon Valley, and she's an expert in fear-based leaders. So Kate developed her methodology growing up in a personal hierarchical family, then refined her approach in the lead worlds of startups, private equity, measuring consulting, and big tech, as, for example, McKinsey, Meta, and Insight Partners. She's also the author of Unbreakable: How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders. And in her free time, you can find her writing comedy and music and cutting her service dog, Annie. So, Kate, very happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrea.
So, Kate, let me start with a question that probably people might have right now. So, and you share with me, you coming from music and you ended up coaching top CEOs in business. Can you like tell us a bit more about what got you to where you are right now?
Definitely. So, growing up, I studied at the local conservatory for about 10 years. And I started a business buying and selling French horns internationally. And that was the first experience that I had with sales and marketing, working with symphony musicians around the world, learning the ins and outs of all the different types of instruments, representing music instrument sellers at conferences. It was a very cool experience. And then after that, I went on to found companies in the retail and peer-to-peer lending AI spaces. But I wanted a harder toolkit to offer my startups. And so I joined McKinsey, which, as a big management consultancy, is a bit like a giant business boot camp. And so I was dropped into all of these different companies, learning how to sink or swim. And it was around that time that I noticed how very lonely my Fortune 500 executives were. They didn't feel like they could go to the people above them and say, help, I don't know what I'm doing. And they certainly couldn't say that to the people below them. And so that was really interesting to me. In my last year at McKinsey, I worked in their venture capital wing, overseeing a portfolio of about 60 startups. And that made me want to
Wow.
go back into the startup space. So I moved out to Silicon Valley, where I was chief of staff at an AI startup. And that's where I really learned how profoundly founders influence culture. When they get it right, it's really right. And when they get it wrong, it's really wrong. And my time as a chief of staff made me very interested in the people and product functions. So on the people side, I started studying coaching. And on the product side, I joined Meta in product strategy, where I worked on a team supporting Meta's leadership, deciding across all of the hundreds of Meta's products what products we should build, buy, or kill, and why. And that's where I really learned how to treat everything, including myself, as a product to be iterated. But it felt a little bit too big to me. And so I moved over to the venture capital space again, working at Insight Partners, where I built their early stage program, ran AI initiatives, and did M&A on behalf of the fund. And that really validated to me how much I love working, with these hundreds of founders one on one. But I found that my founders saw working as a coach and working as a VC together at the same time as a bit of a conflict of interest. They were so afraid I would tell their board, what was going on with their companies. It was hard for them to open up. And the founders I was working at Insight were also very deeply privileged. So I set out on my own after that and expanded my side coaching practice to be full time, focusing specifically on mission driven and underrepresented CEOs. And that's what
Great.
I do today, helping them get a leg up in systems that weren't necessarily designed for them to build products that the world really needs.
Thank you, Kate. That's great. And I think it's important to understand your background, your story, because to me, it makes totally sense of what you do now, at least based on what I'm hearing. So why don't we start with what you just shared at the end? I mean, you work with a very specific type of leaders. They're dealing with something. So, what you are noticing at the moment in the marketplace that not necessarily everybody is aware of, it is something that we should be concerned of.
Yes. So it was around February of this year when I noticed that my founders were starting to spin out. They were freezing, they were overwhelmed, some of them were very panicked. And it was because we were seeing a new fear based wave of leadership sweep across society. Now it's my way or the highway. Get in line or get out. This is the year of efficiency. I'm going to cut the bottom 20%. And for a lot of my founders, they work in highly regulated industries, finance, healthcare, AI. And so they were starting to see major regulatory shifts too that were also very top down. And so it was around that time that I realized I had a toolkit that they didn't have. And I set out to write a tactical guide of how you not only survive, but thrive under fear based top down leaders.
Right. And so we all see these sort of behaviors in these leaders showing up. And now you might argue it's more in the US than other countries. I don't think so. I think it's when it becomes a systemic change in environment, to me personally, it goes everywhere. So every country, every area, every culture experience in a way or another. Although clearly the cultural differences of countries and places will have an impact, clearly. However, what would you say is the reason why this sort of dominating, manipulative, and fear driven leaders they are showing up more maybe than the past? What has been your observation?
What I have noticed is that we're in a new gloves off era of permission to be this way. 10 years ago, the leadership style that was in vogue made CEOs have to at least pretend to care about their employees. And now it's totally different. We see this in TV shows like House of Cards, Billions, Game of Thrones. They all have fear based leaders. We're seeing this in some of the wealthiest men in the world behaving this way. And what that does is it says to everyone else, hey, it's cool to be cruel. You can treat your employees as something less than human because you're powerful. The rules don't apply to you. And so, yeah, it's created this phenomenon that's a bit chilling.
Yes, and I think you are making such a great point is validating or tolerating and becoming and making like this behavior like legit. So people have the option to become or to behave in that way. Of course, doesn't and then doesn't really even make people then in a comfort position to deal with these people. And by the way, the reason why I'm saying about culture is I can tell you, even in the UK, and I can say very openly, there are still many leaders that I know that are operating that way. And I also notice they are how they're changing their attitude and behavior as they go along. Meaning, sometimes they start very nicely. It seems to be a very great boss to work with, but then as soon as the pressure level, the stress level increases, their real identity, which is something that we don't change, is who we are. Okay, that kicks in primarily in terrible or in a very challenging situation. So people, in other words, there are people that have that tendency as an attitude, but people that are becoming also that, given their power, influence, their ego, their status, and their condition they're in. And so, before getting to the implication of that, If you work with the CEOs as you do regularly, what's your suggestion approach if you come across with people they stand to manifest that sort of behaviors themselves?
Yeah, first you have to recognize them for what they are. So if you find someone that you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around and you feel like nothing you can say is right, maybe you feel like they're working against you behind your back, you're probably dealing with a fear based leader. And then you have to start saying, okay, I'm going to engage the right sets of tactics for this leader. If you take the time to learn through things like my book, how they think and how they make decisions, you find out that they're actually very predictable. And that means that a very specific set of tactics works very reliably around them. So, for example, you might start by not telling that person about anything you actually care about because fear based leaders will like to try to take that away from you or harm the things you care about in some way. Then you have to really start clocking their emotional maturity level to understand at what age you should really be treating them and how you should be working with them.
Interesting. So before we get into that, because that's very interesting, because I know a lot of people right now that are in the audience, they're not necessarily CEOs, but people that are dealing with CEOs, they're operating with CEOs, they're working with CEOs most of the time. And by the way, also assistants. So I know assistants that are listening a lot to the show because they want to understand better, and be inside of the mindset of CEOs. But if we step back a second or step up a second, are these CEOs, in your experience, aware of their behaviors and how they drive fear in organizations?
Yeah, they typically are. They typically tend to think there's no such thing as equality. I'm either stepping on someone or they're stepping on me. So I better be the one who's doing the stepping. They tend to be very arrogant. So they'll say, I'm better than everyone else. The rules don't apply to me because the rules weren't meant for people like me. They might say someone who's as successful as me or a genius like me or things like that.
So I can
And
bend the rules because I'm different.
they're different, they're special, they have a very strong sense of self-importance, and they know that they're causing fear in the people around them. They do that reflexively because they themselves are very insecure and motivated by fear, so their subconscious is whispering to them at night, "Am I good enough? Will they ever like me? If they don't like me, will they at least fear me?" But because they are motivated by fear, the only way they know how to motivate others is by fear. And they like being able to see other people's reactions, the stress or the discomfort that they're causing. So they're definitely aware of what they're doing.
Fantastic. It becomes a defensive mechanism. And most of the time is a reflection on their own identity. So the only way for them to lead and manage is the same way how they're dealing with everything, with fear and maybe lack of trust, which is normally very much connected. And if we go a little bit backwards, do you feel that is a product of their past, how they dealt in the past with their issues, challenges, family? So, is there anything that would be worth considering in terms how their identity has shaped before becoming a CEO?
Yes, definitely. People like this typically grew up in families like mine that are like this, where the parents are fear-based leaders. They are missing what I call kindergarten lessons. They didn't really learn how to make friends, how to apologize, some of the critical skills that are important for being really successful in the world. Instead, they learned how to dominate, how to manipulate, how to make other people squirm. So they often have these behaviors going all the way up through their schooling into their first jobs until they become leadership. And well, what before they're in CEO level positions, they're often very good at showing kind of a dark face to the people below them and a smiling face to the people above them. By the time that they're in a true leadership position, they kind of say, I don't have to hide anymore. This is who I am, and if you don't like
I
it,
can be myself.
yeah, that's your fault, you're weak.
Right, right. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it because I'm in charge. I'm in
Yeah,
charge.
exactly.
So that's not really a great environment to work with, right? So when you work, unfortunately, around these sort of leaders. And I, by the way, I don't know about you, Kate, but I receive a lot of messages on LinkedIn. I mean, I have a very large following base, which is not a surprise. So a lot of people contact me, I can tell you, on daily basis. People contacting me and say, Andrea, you say X, Y, Z. It sounds great, fantastic, but what I'm dealing with is a very toxic CEO. I'm dealing with somebody that, you know, I can't change it and it will not change. What should I do? Should I stay, fight, or shall I leave and find a better place? And look, it's always very difficult to give an answer because you don't know, you don't understand the context, you don't know the people, you know how much things can change or not change. Plus, at the end of the day, it's individual choice what to do. You know, you can't force people or decide on behalf. But I think it's an interesting point. It's not a surprise that most of the posts that I post, especially in terms of toxicity, bad behavior from the top, etc., they get the biggest engagement because a lot of people, they are living right now the bad dream, the nightmare about dealing with CEOs or leaders that are like that. But how can you recognize? So imagine people, they are just joining a company, and maybe, as we know, they joined a company and they had a number of interviews, not necessarily with CEO, maybe they did, maybe not. And what they heard or what they figured out is, well, it sounds like a good culture. It sounds like a good environment for me to work with. But then very, very soon, unfortunately, started to realize, oh, that doesn't sound quite right here and there. So we started to notice something. But when would you say, if you work with somebody that is, a fear-based leader, what are the early signs that should, make you think, hold on a second, that's not the right place for me, or something's going on and it's not going in a good way?
Yeah. So, a few things. My book has a section about how to diligence companies and how to find the good pockets in them versus the bad pockets. And one of the things that I say is when you're asking people about someone else, like a leader, if they are genuinely a really good leader, people will have a ton of examples of what they love about them. Often with fear based leaders, their team members are very desperate to have additional hires come on board because they don't want to be, in the terror dome by themselves. And so, but they can't say anything specific good about the leader. So you'll hear things like, Steve is great. Yeah, Shirley's so good. But they won't say, this person looked after me when I was on maternity leave. I love that this person runs team meetings, that make me feel energized in the morning, or, like I feel excited to go to work. They'll give very generic, non-specific, watery feedback. That's usually a sign. But also, you can ask people diligence questions like, tell me an example of a time someone on your team made a mistake. What happened? Or you can ask questions like, tell me about your general weekly cadence. What time do you log on to your laptop? And when do you log off, right? Because fear based leaders kind of expect 24/7 availability from their teams. And so by asking these very specific questions that make it harder for them to hide and listening for hypergeneric feedback back, it's kind of like putting an ear to the ground and you can get a muffled sound of what it's actually like in there.
It's so true. And I think you made this such a great example of if people that are not able to articulate how really good are their CEOs with example, it's an indication of they haven't seen anything like that. So they haven't experienced it. That's why they're not able to articulate it. Which I think it's a very interesting point. And thank you for bringing this up. Now I'm gonna bring you back a second. Then I'm gonna bring you back in the organization. But I want to bring you back a second to this idea of, look, toxicity. There are a lot of public shaming as well. Meaning now people, thanks to social media, they say bluntly, either is a whistleblower or not. But our CEO is firing people, like crazy in 5 minutes or whatever, or they are showing some specific behaviors that drive just fear. But these leaders are still in place. Not everywhere, So it sounds like a very interesting, kind of a paradox. From one hand, people becoming aware about these leaders, they get recognized easier and faster than before. They get punished, at least in the media, for their behavior. Now it goes on the news and etc. But they're still in place. So, do you have a view, a perspective, why that is still happening, while the media are responding now much more actively in fighting against these leaders?
Well, most media is owned by these leaders.
Yeah, I know what
Um,
you were thinking. I know what you were thinking. When I was asking the question, I know where you potentially go. Yes, some of
yeah,
them
yeah.
they
So
had that.
in the
Yes,
US at least,
yes,
our media is owned by they're by people who tend to be billionaires who think the rules shouldn't apply to me and I'm going to give a pass to anyone else who's rich and powerful like me. So if you're a rich and powerful CEO doing bad things and you're part of the boys club and you want to pass, they might give you a little bit of negative coverage, but by and large, they'll give you a pass. The other thing is, right now in the US, this leadership style is so pervasive that it is in tech, business, social sector, public sector. It's not something that employees can escape. And so, if media is going to cover business, they can't not talk about these types of leaders.
yeah,
You hear about how Google is being hollowed out and they have a new performance culture and, all of these different things. And what you're seeing is this kind of like club of fear based leaders saying, all right, we can slowly stop pretending we just get to be ourselves. And that's why for workers or executives who feel like they just keep jumping from the frying pan into the fire, they have to learn how these leaders think, how they make decisions, and how to use tactics on them to kind of run circles around them because they're starting to be really inescapable.
right. Yeah, it's inescapable. Inescapable. I definitely get that. Now I cannot make any judgment of what you shared, but clearly I can see some connection between, the media, who's owning the media, and who is showing up as a CEO. But if we go back now to the organization, so you said, so there are some signs that to detect how people drive fear in their organizations. But if you are not an employee, but you are in a position of management or leadership, while you are either a senior director, maybe vice president, or anyway, so you are in the management and leadership position, and you are between two fires. I would say the CEO, that's that level of CEO, that kind of CEO, and then the rest organization. So it's gonna be challenging, right? Because from one end, you don't want to drive, if you don't buy that, you don't want to drive fear for your own people, but at the same time, you have a CEO that is maybe is driving fear. So what is going to be the right approach for a senior leader, to play, nice or right? I wouldn't say nice, maybe right, to play right in a context like that.
Yes, definitely. So, right now, you have some fear based leaders and some very good people, and they're all thrown in companies together. And for the very good people, maybe you're a peer to the CEO and the C suite, you're the CFO, the CPO, the CTO. You can shield your team and the hierarchy underneath you if you understand how to speak the fear based leaders' language and how to make them look good. Because fear based leaders leave people who they think are an ally mostly alone. They also leave people who deliver very strong results and make them look very good alone. And so, what you have to do, let's say if you're a CTO with a CEO like this, is figure out what the CEO cares about. Make sure he's always getting exactly what he wants and needs, and don't do any of the things that are that CEO's specific triggers, and you can probably retain pretty significant control over everyone below you.
Yes. And tell me something. So I agree. But when that becomes, I like the term that you used before, the pervasive. So it's pervasing the toxicity. And by the way, what unfortunately we experience is sometimes senior leaders, just to please their CEO, they started to act exactly as they do. And that, unfortunately, instead of fighting back fear and toxicity, actually they are reinforcing and making like a viral element, which at the end of the day is going to end to creating or shaping unintentionally, intentionally, whatever, by shaping a very toxic culture and people at some point leave. And that's, I think, what we found is then people get at the bottom of this, and now they need to deal with an environment where there is no fun, there is no energy, there is no motivation, there is no good reason to be there. Is this something that can be changed? Meaning, I mean, there is hope for people to do something about it, or they need to unfortunately make a decision, say, that's not good for me. It's having an impact on my career, my mental health, or whatever. So I need to leave. What's your experience? Because now they're going more into the entire organization.
Yeah, it depends on an individual's own preferences and their characteristics. For example, I worked with 8 different fear based leaders as bosses. I stayed with them as long as I was getting more out of it than they were taking from me. But I've also worked really hard on resilience, like shoring up my own identity, shoring up the types of things that keep me from getting drained or having mental health impacts. Right now, like we're in an era where it's very hard to escape. And so people can quit, they could retire, they could start their own business, things like that. But more often than not, they have to learn the new skill set that teaches them how to be around the chaos, be around the toxicity, but essentially have a protective bubble around them that says, nope, can't touch me, doesn't bother me. Like, I am in control of myself. I have my own agency. And I see how weak and predictable and insecure the leaders above me are. And I know how to upwardly manage them. Because a lot of times when people feel demoralized, it's because they feel stuck and hopeless. But if you have the right skills, it unsticks you and can give you hope.
Regardless what the culture is about, because sometimes people feel like I can be, I might have all the right skills to lead in this situation and do my stuff properly. But then if something goes wrong or something happens anyway, I will pay the price. So, I mean, putting your head down and deliver and be a performer, which I think is always a good thing, but is an implication, right? So, in terms of building a culture of ownership or mutual responsibility, integration, collaboration, there's going to be a loose ends because people they don't feel like how they can work together in an environment where it's difficult to be yourself because you need to watch with every step you do. You have to be mindful what you say. Doesn't sound very easy for people, right, to operate in these environments.
No, it's not. It's not easy and it's not fun. But for a lot of people, these are the types of places that they are. And it may never become fun, but it can be tolerable. And you can develop the resilience and personal fortitude and the toolkits to kind of shield yourself and
Hmm.
also shield whatever it is that you care about. Maybe you're a doctor in a hospital system with a CEO like this. If you can protect your nurses and your patients, then that can be enough. But people have to have a very clear sense of their priorities, and they have to be actively strategizing on how to make it both livable and a positive time in their life. That may sound kind of strange, but I've spent basically my entire life around fear based leaders. And if I had said the whole time, "Oh, everything's terrible, like I don't like it, this is no fun," I wouldn't have had a life. And so I would say, like, I'm proof that you can do things. You can write comedy, you can write books, you can have pets, you can have interesting jobs. Um, Around these very difficult people and not let it impact you.
Yeah, and what traits needs to be, or skills, or traits, or attitude needs to be, or mindset shift is required to operate in that specific condition that you are pointing to?
Definitely. There are several. So first of all, the first chapter in my book is about how to build resilience. And I talk about building resilience as diversifying your sources of identity. So if your only source of identity is that I'm CEO of Coca Cola, and then someone comes along, an activist investor or board member who threatens that identity, it can feel like your entire world is collapsing. But if I say, "I am Kate, I'm a founder myself, I'm a CEO coach, I'm a service dog handler, I'm a comedian, I'm an author, I'm a daughter, I'm a cousin," and I have 15 different sources of identity, then if someone takes away one of them, if they say, "You can't be an author anymore," it doesn't matter to me because I know that I'm so much more than that. Similarly, I talk to people about how to protect their energy. So these types of environments are very draining, which means you need a deliberate strategy to quote unquote fill your cup each week. And so knowing what activities reliably re-energize you is very important. Whether it's watching your kids' little league game or gardening or baking or being part of a community group or taking walks, whatever that is, you have to be intentionally doing that 3 or 4 times a week to make sure your battery is high enough that you have enough energy to deploy the strategies that will protect you.
Right, is building your own. So stick with your identity, don't lose your own power, and create your own mechanism to protect yourself and your well-being and your mental health, etc., to stay focused to what is the priority. I would say also what is your purpose. So you mentioned a great example about healthcare. So the purpose of nurses, doctors, saving people's life as a hope, which I think is right. So regardless of what's going on, and stay focused on what's your purpose and your priority. I think it's a good call in to preserve also your in building your own resilience. I think on the segue, I think I'd like to go back to what you said before, and then we move a little bit fast on the next point. But you said in terms of, so you're not powerless. That's what you're saying. There is a way to deal with these situations. And you said before these leaders are predictable. So I'd try to understand a little bit more about what you mean by predictable. Meaning, sounds like they are repeating because we all, human beings, and we live with habits and habitual patterns created unconsciously, in order to let us survive, deal, performance, whatever. So these leaders are predictable. So what's the implication being predictable? First of all, how they are predictable, in what way? And second, what is useful to know, how that is useful to know for people to deal with this predictability of their behavior.
Yes, definitely. So you could think of fear as a cheap fuel. It robs you of your creativity to run on fear because when your brain is kind of in an activated state, if I don't keep running, keep abusing others, like I will fall down. Like it doesn't give your brain space to be a strong creative problem solver. And so that means that fear based leaders tend to behave in very predictable ways. And that means that in the 30 tactics in my book, the tactics work very reliably on them. For example, fear based leaders don't negotiate in good faith at all. If they tell you they're going to pay you $100,000 for a contract, they're probably only going to pay you 50. So you need to make the original contract for twice as much as what you need. If you come into a negotiation with them and you want one thing, you have to tell them you want 3 things. And you have to tell them that you really, really want the first 2 that you don't actually want, so that they can kill those and make you go away with just settling for the 3rd, the thing you actually want. If there are people around a fear-based leader, they will typically, try to metaphorically kick each of them and see who gives the most interesting reaction. So if you're around a fear-based leader, you have to be very mindful of not reacting. I call it being a gray rock. Be the most inert part of the landscape around you so that when someone kicks you, nothing happens. That's really boring to people who feed on attention. And so if you want someone to leave you alone, you don't react. Same thing, if you want to gain leverage, fear based leaders want to know that they are on a pedestal and the entire world below is catering to them. So, one of the things that drives them the craziest is not being available, not responding, which is easily excused by, oh, my phone was off, or I didn't have cell service, or whatever. But it sends them into a spiral and it reasserts that you actually have power over them. And so, those are just like a few examples of how they behave in predictable ways. And if you understand it, how you can anticipate what they're going to do.
Yeah, and this was some what you share some important basis of human psychology. You know how to instead of fight back is I would probably summarize, which I don't know what you're pointing to, but I think it's to me is inside the same camp, is being able to control your emotion, first of all. So my ability to control your emotion and to stay present and not letting go, because letting go normally doesn't work well in any sort of either is negotiation or of high stake conversation when things get animated or heated. So the ability to control emotions to me is one of the most critical leadership skills people need to develop. And by the way, that doesn't mean to hide. That doesn't mean to not be yourself, authentic. It means of don't let your emotion prevail. If the situation starts to get in a certain way that doesn't necessarily fulfill your expectation. So it's a great point. Do you feel like I have a last question? Do you feel there is a hope for employees, for leaders to help these fear-based leaders? It doesn't necessarily need to be the CEO. It could be one of the senior leaders because sometimes is actually your boss. It doesn't necessarily need to be CEO. Is there a hope? There is a way for people to deal with these people, not just responding, reacting, dealing with this situation, but more an empowering way for them to recreate the relationship with their boss in a way that fear could be eradicated. In other words, is it could be your boss coachable even if you don't coach him literally, by helping him to see something different, shift his perception, shift his way of thinking, his mindset, so they can embrace a different behavior. Or the only thing they can do from experience is no, we can't because that's who they are, because you said before that's part of your identity.
There are two different situations, maybe would have different outcomes. For someone who is genuinely a fear based leader, they don't have the self awareness or the capacity
Right,
to
right.
want to be a strengths based leader. So if you want them to behave differently, you have to show them what's in it for them. And so if you can put what you want them to do in terms of incentives that they care about, they may do some of it, but not if it takes away their posturing of being mighty, fearful, like scary, big. So you can't turn them into a teddy bear essentially. There's another type of leader that tends to be more like C minus one, C minus two. And those are people who are not actually fear based leaders, but are getting pressure from the people above them to act in fear based ways. If that's what's going on, then definitely, because those people just feel very stuck and they need to be shown a way out. And a good way to me show them a way out is to show them how to present upwardly as fear based to the people above them. Have them use harsh language in meetings like, I'm going to fire 10% of my staff if they don't deliver these stupid deadlines. But then below, actually say, you're my team. I care about you. Everyone matters. Let's work together. It's okay to teach them things like that that teaches them the skills they need to survive.
Yes, I think it's a great distinction, and thank you for having said that. I think it's a good one, and I would say there's open. I think the second condition, the second circumstances, is something that people can deal with because from one end, I think most probably one of the biggest concern of people say, okay, if it's just my boss and on the top there is a pressure, but people that are not fear based, what can I do about it? Can I talk to the boss of my boss? Can I talk with somebody? I think that's definitely possible, especially if that toxicity then gets to the point where it should be reported. Then, of course, is a different, different colors, different nuances about that. Great. So, okay, that was a very interesting and fascinating conversation of a topic that's not normally talked and not spoken sufficiently. So thank you for bringing this up, Kate. So where people should go if they want to know more about you, your work, your story, your thinking, etc.
Yes, definitely. So my book is available for pre-order now on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and Indigo. You can follow me on Instagram at Kate Unbreakable Lowry. You can find my website, katelowry.com, if you're interested in working with me as a coaching client. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Fantastic. Kate, thank you so much for bringing this important topic to the conversation today. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrea.